Chill in the air surrounded Clara as she parked the car at Dark Hollow Farm. And on a crisp, dull, autumn afternoon, she and her 11-year-old brother Mitch ventured into the sprawling expanse of the remote pumpkin farm nestled far from the bustling trees of their little town. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the rolling hills, while the brilliant hues of orange and gold painted the landscape in a mesmerizing autumn patchwork. As they approached the entrance to the path, an imposing archway made of twisted branches welcomed them, and there was a pretty sign which had the word painted neatly onto it. But the atmosphere shifted instantly once they'd passed through the arch and entered the field. An array of tall, imposing scarecrows stood sentinel amid the pumpkin patch, their tattered clothes flapping eerily in the gentle wind. Each one had beady black eyes, which seemed to watch the two siblings wherever they went. Clara's playful voice broke through the tense atmosphere. "Look at those mean-looking things, Mitch. Say, one of them looks like it has a head even larger than yours." Mitch was yet to get anywhere near a growth spurt, other than his cranium, which his sister never let him forget, albeit in a loving, sisterly way. "Well, I might have a big head, but yours has the stuff inside it as that scarecrow does, straw and old rags, which must be why you keep going out with absolute idiots." They both eyed each other for a moment, and then laughed. As the two siblings strolled deeper into the patch, they found themselves surrounded by pumpkins of all sizes, but each one nice, plump, and ripe for picking. A rich, earthy scent hung heavy in the air. Clara looked around to see other people looking for pumpkins, yet there were few. As the two of them continued to search for the perfect two pumpkins, Clara couldn't help but feel something was a little off. She reached out and pulled lightly at her brother's sleeve. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "Feel what?" Mitch replied. Clara looked around before replying. It's like the air's getting thicker." Mitch stopped what he was doing and scanned their surroundings. Both stood for a moment and seemed to notice simultaneously how thick the mist around them was becoming. The voices of visitors began to fade, swallowed up by the creeping mist that seemed to be rising up from the ground, wrapping tight around them. Visibility diminished rapidly as the mist continued to thicken, obscuring the vibrant colors of the pumpkins and further diminishing the laughter and chatter of other pumpkin seekers to muffled echoes and then to silence. The two of them tried not to let their imaginations get the better of them and continued to scour the land of Halloween decorations they had gone there for, and the humorous bond between the siblings held strong. As the minutes passed, Clara began to notice vague shapes shifting in the mist around them, dark figures fading in and out of sight, their forms both familiar and distorted. Those figures looked a lot like the seemingly lifeless scarecrows that watched them upon their arrival into the fields. Clara tightened her grip on Mitch's hand, a tremor of unease fluttering into her stomach. "Mitch?" she whispered. "Do you see that?" Her brother nodded slowly, his face pale. "Yeah, it's like those things. They're moving." The two exchanged worried glances just as blood-curdling screams echoed through the mist, reverberating off the distant field walls. It was followed swiftly by another cry of anguish, which was both shrill and desperate, bringing with it the stark reality of the danger lurking just beyond their vision. Panic clawed at their throats, and instinct took over. Without thinking, they turned and began to run. The fog curled around them, thick and suffocating, as the horrific sound of struggles and murder punctuated the air. The two ran, but their feet felt heavy, almost as if they were trying to run underwater. It felt as if the mist was alive, seeking to hold them back in its malicious embrace. Pumpkins they had admired moments ago now appeared as grotesque shadows, and the warmth of the sun was a distant memory. As they moved blindly through the mist, the feeling that the towering guardians of the field were within reaching distance was overwhelming. In their frantic escape, they finally stumbled upon the farmhouse of Dark Hollow. Bright white appearance of the building, upon their arrival earlier that day, had faded to a somber grey, and even that paint was peeling away to reveal the bare wood beneath. The windows were dark, their shattered glass reflecting the sparse light, daring them to enter, offering them solace, safety, or maybe something else. The cold autumn air wrapped around them, chilling them down to their very bones as they dashed inside. The interior was cloaked in a thick layer of dust, remnants of the past whispering through the cobwebs that clung to the corners of the room. Shadows danced upon the walls, and the old floor creaked ominously under their cautious steps. Clara could hear her heartbeat hammering in her ears, each thump echoing the fear coursing through her veins. "We need to hide," she gasped, pulling Mitch behind a large wooden unit. "Shouldn't we call for help?" Mitch asked. "No, don't call out. Let's just hide and wait," See if the mist lifts. Then we can get out of here." As they crouched in silence, the distant sound of branches scratching against the farmhouse filled the air, creating an eerie soundtrack to their growing dread. Outside, the screams had ceased, replaced by a dreadful quiet that amplified every creak of the old house. Clara's heart raced as her eyes darted towards the door, fearing every slight noise might herald the arrival of the nightmare outside, which they had barely escaped. "Sis?" Mitch whispered, his voice trembling. "What if they come in here?" He swallowed hard, his face pale beneath the fallen leaves that clung to his hair. "Just stay still and stay quiet. It's gonna be okay." She hugged her brother tight. After remaining huddled up for some time, Clara told her brother they needed to either try and get back to the car or look for a phone to get help. The area they were in was notorious for lack of connection when it came to mobile phones. They got to their feet and began to look around, slowly exploring the downstairs rooms before reaching the kitchen. "This place is a dump," Mitch remarked, wrinkling his nose at the piles of dirty dishes stacked haphazardly around the sink. Bloodstains, dark and thick, marred the kitchen floor, making Clara's heart race. Mitch pointed, fear clear in his voice as he spoke. "Look." In the hallway, a tall figure loomed. An eerily gaunt woman, her hair stringy and unkempt, lips scabbed and dry. She glared at them with a shotgun cradled in her arms. "Sit down," she ordered, gesturing to the kitchen table with her gun. Her voice was low and dispassionate. Clara and Mitch exchanged horrified looks before complying. "You have walked into a legacy, children," her dark eyes glinting like polished stones. "For generations, my family has collected souls to give life to the scarecrows that guard this land. Those who dare to come here at this time of year, well, they tend to meet their end. And tonight, the two of you will join our harvest." Panic surged as Clara's mind raced for a plan. "You can't do this!" The woman smiled coldly. "Oh, but I can. You see, the scarecrows are not just idle figures. They are guardians of a darker heritage, a pact made long ago with the earth itself. They're my babies. See, I'm alone out here, totally alone, so I need to build my family, as well as feed my land." Clara's eyes frantically searched for an exit, and the woman began to laugh, the tone rich with malice. "Try and flee if you wish, but you cannot escape the harvest. If you get past me, the mist will constrict you, and then my babies will come for you." It was at this point that Clara realized it had grown noticeably darker outside, and she was sure that she could see the shapes of tall figures looming not far from the windows. "I saw you upon your arrival," the woman said. "I told my children not to slay you like the others. Your destiny awaits, and it is a little different. I'll harvest your flesh, chop it delicately, and mix it with the soil. And through you, my crops will flourish, but not your hearts. No, your hearts will be placed inside a vessel made by hands, which will be brought to life by your heart and your soul. And you will become part of my growing family." Clara could see it. She and her brother bound to lifeless forms, never to see their parents again. She would not permit it, not without a fight. She would fight and get them home. In a feat of strength that defied her petite frame, Clara shoved the large wooden table with all of her might. The table hit the woman, sending her falling backwards on her chair. The gun flew from her hands, and in that moment Clara made a last-ditch attempt to save both she and her brother's life. 3 weeks later. "Just because your body is bigger, don't think that your head still doesn't look enormous, Mitch," I thought, because I couldn't say it. Because until the visitors come, we are unable to move. And apparently, when they do arrive, a sense of purpose, albeit an evil purpose, will take over our minds, and our bodies, I'd guess you call them. So we won't be able to move in the way we would like, which would be to get the hell out of here. But we can think. Though how that works having no brain, I really don't know. It hasn't quite worked out for Mitch yet, as although me and the others can speak telepathically, he's still settling into his new body. Or maybe he's just mad at me for bringing him here for bigger and better pumpkins, when he wanted to go to the local store, which looking back would have been perfectly sufficient. But hey, we live and we learn, so they say. Anyway, I have some crows to scare off. Happy Halloween. So today is the 31st of October. It's Halloween, and for the longest time, it was my favorite night of the year. I've been a horror fan since I watched The Evil Dead at 9 years old. It was on the TV one night, and my dad, who would never usually have let me watch it, had fallen asleep on the sofa after too many beers, and I just happened to be sat next to him when it came on. I was terrified throughout, but also excited, and had never felt anything like it, so my love of horror was born. Every year since, when Halloween rolled around, I carved a couple pumpkins and put up some decorations. I also always made sure I was free for the entire day, as I like to get plenty of snacks in and watch a marathon of horror movies. I've also always got plenty of treats for the kids who come knocking on the door, and I gotta say, those costumes are getting better and better with each passing year. Just as I took a liking to the horror genre as a kid, as did my brother, Kyle. Although we always differed on our favorite movies, I liked Jason, he preferred Freddy. He liked the Cenobites, whereas I opted for the Candyman. However, the differences in our love of movies was only the tip of the iceberg, as Kyle and I seemed to differ in every way possible. The way we were, the way we acted, the company we kept. He always saw me as a soft touch, or a pussy as you would like to call me, whereas he was always abrasive, confrontational, getting into trouble. My mother has always said that combined, we would have made the perfect human being, totally balanced in all areas. As different as we had always been, there was always a strong connection. We argued, sure, but we always made up pretty quick. And throughout our lives, I'd always try and help him in any way possible, whether it was finding a job, dealing with the cops, or chatting to girls. I've always been there for my brother, and he, in turn, always had my back, and dealt with any trouble I might find myself in. I've never had to worry about being bullied, as Kyle was always a force to be reckoned with. Well, I have a story to tell about my brother. It takes place 1 year ago on Halloween, and this story is the reason Halloween might never be the same again. But I guess it's my brother's tale rather than mine, but my experience is wrapped around it. Anyway, here goes. A year ago today, around 11 p.m., I had fallen asleep on the sofa watching my usual horror movie marathon. I woke up to see my brother, sitting in the armchair in my lounge. I jumped. Not just because I didn't expect to see him, as he didn't have a key to my house, but also because he was dressed in full Halloween getup. A zombie was my first thought. Seeing him sat quietly in the dark, watching me, was a sinister sight indeed. I remember dropping the F-bomb as I stood up quickly, and he in turn raised a hand and quietly apologized for scaring me. He then told me to calm down and sit down. The first thing I noticed was how calm and flat his demeanor was. That was not like my brother at all, who had always had too much energy, which in turn got him into mischief. Also the contrast of his outfit, which was pretty effective, mixed with the quiet, somber man sitting in front of me. It just seemed a little absurd. I asked him what he was doing in my house, and how he'd ever gotten in. He then told me that none of that mattered, and what did matter was the fact he was there, because he had something to tell me. So I sat, and listened, and then he began telling me how his night had unfolded. This was his story. I sure do love Halloween, bro. All the urban legends, the whispers and the shadows, where anything could lurk. My friends had decided to go to a nearby fancy dress party, but Hansel, the guy's whose party it was, well, he's a dealer. I know I'm a fair bit of cash, so I chose not to go. Instead, I found myself walking alone through the misty streets in my new werewolf mask. But it wasn't merely a mask. I swear, when I put that thing on, it emphasized that angry, antagonistic side I've always had within me. You think I can be a dick without the mask? You should have seen me with it. The streets were draped in darkness, illuminated only by flickering jack-o'-lanterns and the occasional flash of distant fireworks. Kids scurried around in costumes. Quite funny, really, having these innocent children dress up as characters that are known to kill and harm. Not like me. I wore that mask with pride, totally getting into the role, feeling like I could tear anyone in my path to pieces, and scaring the living daylights out of anyone I came across in the process. As the night wore on, my urge to instill fear just grew. I walked out of town a little, to streets I wasn't quite familiar with. I saw a modest little house tucked away from the main street. It was not too much to look at, but looked inviting, a nice warm glow visible in one of the windows. I decided whoever lived there were good people, and I was in the mood to expose them to a bit of bad. I approached, raised my fists, and banged on the window on the side of the house with a vigor that was both juvenile yet exhilarating. The thought of their startled face or faces filled me with a sense of excitement. It really got my adrenaline going. Once I thought I might have their hearts beating a little quicker, I knocked hard on the front door. I waited, not sure if whoever was inside was going to have the balls to open up. A few seconds later, I heard a series of locks being undone, and then, to my astonishment, the door was pulled open by a sweet old lady. Her thin silver hair framing a face that looked 100 years old. She was hunched over, and had to practically lean back to look up at me. The sight of her, looking helpless and vulnerable, only seemed to fill me with rage. "Trick or treat!" I shouted in her face. She closed her eyes as if being hit by gale force winds. After a second she spoke. "Oh, it's Halloween again already?" she asked, in a meek voice. "It sure is," I replied. "So answer the question. Is it trick or treat?" "Oh dear," she said. "I'm afraid I don't have any treats to give you. I haven't been able to shop in weeks, as I've been unwell. And Abe? Well, he doesn't get out much at all." I could feel the malice building up inside me as I looked down at her. Halloween is a time where the undead are free to roam, and people who answer their doors hand out goodies to those who have gone to the effort to dress up. It's not the time for old people to tell me how goddamn useless they are. You've disappointed me, not having anything nice to give me. That's not how sweet old ladies should act. You're a disgrace. I bet your grandkids really hate you." Can you believe that old lady started to laugh? "Oh, sweet child," she said. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am a disgrace, and others would most definitely not approve of my ways." "Damn right," I replied. "Well, you better find something for me soon, otherwise you're going to have a very bad night, and I'm not sure your brittle bones or your old dusty heart could take it." The old lady started to talk. "Well, I really don't," but I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. "The best thing you can do is stop trying to get that shrunken old brain of yours working, and let me inside to take something of my choosing. How does that sound?" The old lady seemed to think on it for a moment, struggling with what I asked her for, but then it was like she suddenly made a decision. "Of course, dear. Come right in. But take care not to disturb anything." She welcomed me in with an air of innocence I found quite amusing, given what a douche I was being. It was almost as if she didn't recognize my mockery and downright nasty comments. I made my way into the dimly lit hallway, which looked like it hadn't been dusted or decorated for decades. I looked around for something valuable. Now, you know, even me, the way I am, I'd never been that much of a dick, but in that mask, I was a different human being. We went into the kitchen, which was cluttered and filled with jars, the contents of which were covered in mold. I couldn't see anything in there worth taking. It was all pretty basic. I made a few nasty comments to the woman, telling her she needed to get her fat old ass into gear and clean up. She just nodded and smiled. I then looked towards the lounge, where I could hear the fireplace crackling invitingly. "Let's go look in there," I said, and left the room. She just toddled after me. As I entered, my gaze landed on an old man seated in a tattered armchair, facing the fire. He was just staring into the flames. He looked even more ancient than she did, his skin etched with lines so deep he looked like he was made of tree bark. "He alive?" I asked, looking back at the lady. "I assume so," she replied, with a thin smile, which I thought was a real strange answer. "Hey, old dude," I shouted, approaching him. "Thinking of the past, huh? Back when you didn't crap your pants and you could walk upstairs without nearly having a heart attack?" There was no response, no acknowledgement, no reaction at all. He just remained entranced by the fire. The only movement to betray him was his hand, which shook a little, resting limply on the armrest of his chair. "At your jerkin hand, is it?" I asked, and I laughed out loud at that, but I didn't leave the guy alone. "Can't you talk? I'm a guest in your crappy little home. Don't you have any manners, old man?" But still, he just looked into those flames. The only sound in the room were the popping embers of that fire. I got a little bored of him, and I casually started looking around, trying to find something of worth, and as I did, the atmosphere shifted. I stopped in my tracks when I noticed the steel bars in the windows, which were both rusted and daunting, and for the first time that night, the mask lost its grip a little, and apprehension trickled down my spine. "Nice decor," I said, trying to keep my bravado intact, "but those are a little useless when you're willing to let a werewolf waltz right into your house." It was then I heard the unmistakable sound of quick footsteps move swiftly across the room, and then of the door being pulled shut, followed by the loud click of a lock. I ran over to the door and felt panic begin to ease its way into my senses as I rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Hey, what the hell is this? Let me out of here, you senile old bitch!" I shouted, and banged on the door, but my words were met with a deafening silence. I walked back over to the window and tested how strong those bars were, and found out they were pretty solid. I then had the overwhelming feeling of being watched and turned to see the old man looking at me. A smile stretched across his features, exposing yellow teeth that gleamed in the fire's light. "What the hell are you smiling at?" I asked. "You better ask your crazy old wife to let me out of here, otherwise I'll be taking it out on you." "You asked what the bars are for," the old man said. "They aren't to keep you out, they are to keep me in." What the hell are you talking about? I said. You're as mad as she is. Nice mask, the old man said. And good taste, going for the lycanthrope. It's a werewolf, you idiot, I replied, my panic mixing with both confusion and rage. A truly powerful and imposing beast, the man continued. But tell me, do you feel either powerful or imposing right now? By that point I was scared, as I knew something was off. And after all that big talk, all I could manage was a, shut the hell up. The old man spoke like I hadn't even said anything. The trouble is, he said, there are creatures on this earth that can coexist, and creatures that most definitely cannot. And I'm afraid you ventured onto my territory, and in this instance, there can only be one who can prevail. Before I could process his words, he fell forwards onto the floor. A sound, the likes of which I'd never heard, erupted from his throat. He then tore off his clothes. His bones cracked, shifting and moving under his thin skin like clumsy puppets, each loud pop echoing the transformation. His figure writhed and became distorted. It was utterly grotesque, but I couldn't look away. Muscles swelled, and hair burst from his body in wild patches, transforming him from a frail old man into a thick, imposing creature. His face elongated, jaw unhinging and then remodeling itself, as huge pointed teeth pushed out from his gums, drool dripped from his lips, pooling on the ground below. The firelight flickered, highlighting sharp claws and glistening fur, and the warmth of that room was replaced with an oppressive feeling of doom. The wolf-like creature before me emanated feral strength, and then it stood, its form towering above where the old man had once sat. God, no! I said, before stumbling back against the wall. I was desperately seeking an escape. The creature seemed to grin, its eyes glowing with a predatory delight. My heart raced as the creature took a step forward, the very essence of horror enveloping me as I realized the repercussions of my actions. My mask had led me astray, and led me to my end. I lunged for the door once more, but it was too late. In an instant, the beast closed the distance between us. I never even had the chance to scream as the creature tore into me, teeth and claws ripping at my neck and chest, and I felt myself leaving the world I had mocked and took for granted. And I realized I'd paid the ultimate price for my insatiable thirst for amusement at other people's expense. After Carl finished talking, I sat looking at my brother trying to make out what he just told me. I wanted to believe it was just a well-spun yam for Halloween, but the way the blood dripped down his jacket, the vacant look in his eyes, I could see I was potentially looking at more than just a tale. Did that really happen? I asked, feeling stupid asking the question. It did, Kyle replied. So then how is it you're sitting here talking to me? I asked, waiting for my brother to start laughing and tell me it was all a joke. You tell me, he replied. I feel different, like I'm drifting around. I feel lost, but at the same time, I feel nothing. How did you get in here? I asked. I just drifted in. Listen here, little brother, I gotta go. I'll see you around, maybe. Kyle, wait, I said, but then witnessed him fade away right there in front of me. That was a year ago, and we reported my brother missing shortly afterwards, but after an extensive search, nothing came up, and I guess I know it never will, as I see my brother sometimes. He never comes to me, and if I approach him, he fades, but I see him, in those same clothes, with those same wounds, wandering the streets, looking lost, still holding that blood-soaked mask in his left hand.